Hey everyone, it's Dwayne Monroe, one of the hosts, along with Dennis Claxton and R.C. Roberts of the Film Conversations podcast. In today's episode, my co-host and I will be talking about the work of Douglas Sirk, one of the great film directors of the 20th century. In the course of gathering notes for this episode and this introduction, I found an intriguing bio of Sirk posted at the Senses of Cinema website, and the link will be in the show notes. And I'll just read the first few paragraphs to set the stage. Douglas Sirk was one of the 20th century cinema's great ironists, and perhaps the most distinctive characteristic of the films he made in Europe and America is the way they are able to create a gulf between how his characters see themselves and our view of them. Sirk's characters grapple with the same problems that have always afflicted men and women and parents and children to do with love, death, and social circumstance. In some cases, they do so in the world of melodrama, as in films as various as Schlussakkord from 1936, La Habanera, 1937. There's Always Tomorrow, 1955, and Imitation of Life, 1958. In others, it's a world of color and music, as in the trio of comedy musicals he made during the 1950s. Has Anybody Seen My Gal? 1951. Meet Me at the Fair, 1952. And Take Me to Town, also in 1952. Part of a series he had planned about small-town America. In others, it's the excitement of mystery, romance, or adventure, in films such as Lord, 1946, Taza, Son of Cochise, 1953, shot in 3D, and Captain Lightfoot in 1954. But Sirk adds another layer to the shape of the films and to his characters' struggles within them. All around, but beyond the reach of their vision, are forces which define the parameters of their lives. These are evident at the most basic level, in the way that the plots almost always hinge on problems for which the only solution becomes a convenient miracle, a deus ex machina. We will talk about Sirk's work and life broadly, and more specifically, we will use his 1956 melodrama masterpiece, Written on the Wind, as the focus of our discussion. I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, it's me, Dwayne Monroe, one of the co-hosts of the Film Conversations podcast, and I'm here once again with my illustrious co-hosts, Dennis Claxton and R.C. Charles Roberts, and you cannot see, but Charles has with him, I believe her name is Penny.
Her name is?
Yes, a venerable member of the feline family. She's quite lovely, actually.
What is a villain?
What indeed is a villain without a cat? Listen, if Blofeld had time for his lovely cat as he was plotting the world's destruction, certainly you can have a cat. And as I mentioned in the introduction, the topic of today's show is the film director Douglas Sirk, or I believe in German it's Detlef Sirk. I'm probably mispronouncing the German. An emigre from Germany, actually, who came to the United States, to Hollywood, made quite a name for himself, and is best known for his work in what are called melodramas, or what used to be called, I believe, weepies, once upon a time. And, for this show, we've all done research, of course, but I think that Dennis has done some rather extensive work into Sirk's background and his career. So, Dennis, please do us the honors of getting us started in our conversation.
I mentioned earlier before we started recording that I had gone on a nature excursion, and so looking at Charles's cat, I just wanted to mention I saw some chickens yesterday, and there was a little placard that said, "Chickens are the closest relative to T-Rex."
That's actually true. I believe that's true.
Since we're speaking of great directors, whenever I see chickens, I always think of Werner Herzog and his deep-seated hatred of chickens.
That's something we'll have to get into another time.
Douglas Sirk raised chickens.
Oh, interesting.
in the San
Interesting.
Fernando Valley. He raised
Huh.
chickens and alfalfa, and he says, compared with Hollywood, it was his favorite time in
Hmm.
California, raising
Hmm.
chickens.
Hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, so we are talking about Douglas Sirk in general, but also about one film in particular.
Yes, that's correct.
So, which is Written on the Wind,
Mm-hmm.
WOTW. So I want to start with a quote from Fassbinder. Fassbinder says, quote, "In Written on the Wind, the good, the normal, the beautiful are always utterly revolting. The evil, the weak, the dissolute arouse one's compassion, even for the manipulators of the good." I think that sums Sirk up pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to do Sirk like a while back.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, I've been sort of marinating with Sirk for a while. And, well, my whole life, actually, because I
Mm-hmm.
remember from elementary school, I have a vivid memory of a scene from a Sirk movie, which is, let me look, James Edwards. You remember we were talking in The Killing?
Yes.
The black actor in James
Yes.
in The Killing?
Yes. The gentleman who played the actor who played the security guard at the track. Yeah.
So this guy was in a Sirk movie called Battle Hymn.
Ah.
And Battle
Yes.
Hymn,
Yes.
yeah. Have you seen that?
I have on TCM years ago. Yes.
Yeah. So I saw that when I was a kid, and it's an interesting sort of history of the movie. There was a guy, he was a fighter pilot, an American fighter pilot in World War II, who, as happens, accidentally bombed an orphanage in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And then he came back to the U.S. and he was a Protestant minister. And then he re-upped and went to Korea.
Mm.
And he is famous for saving orphans from an orphanage in South Korea. Well, what is now South Korea. Anyway, apparently he embellished his story. But long story short, Douglas Sirk made a movie of his story.
Interesting.
And starring Rock Hudson as. And anyway, I remember this guy, James Edwards. There was a scene where he accidentally, again, wartime, what is an accident, kills children. And I remember him saying, "Those poor little kids." This is like seared in my brain,
Yeah. Yes.
When from childhood.
Yes.
Excuse me. So anyway, I remember Douglas Sirk from then. And that is the kind of movie maker he was.
Yeah.
That kind of thing where you remember vividly.
Yes.
The color especially, I think.
Yes.
The color and the music, which melodrama, the classical root of melodrama is music and story, right? So that's what melodrama is. That's what he did. So if I wanted to sum up, sort of, we can get into this later because I sent you guys this essay by a guy named Andrew Bonnell.
Yes, the essay about Sirk's time as a filmmaker in late 1930s Germany and his role, wittingly or unwittingly, within the film industry that Goebbels architected once the Nazis took control of the country.
Yeah, I think that is very telling because Sirk was ignored for, you know, he left Hollywood in around 1960,
Mm-hmm.
and he was rediscovered through this book by a guy named. I'm sorry, hold on.
Mm-hmm. Dennis is going through his voluminous notes in his vast library.
There's a book called Sirk on Sirk. You probably
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Conversations with John Holliday.
Yes.
This first came out in the early 70s. And so Sirk had been sort of ignored for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then this book sort of brought him back. And then Fassbender and other people, John Waters is a big fan.
Mm-hmm.
Todd Haynes. Todd Haynes did a remake of a Sirk movie.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? He called it Far From Heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Sirk's was All That Heaven Allows.
Yes.
And I think I mentioned before we started recording that Sirk said, heaven is very stingy.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I was glad to find this Bunnell thing because everything that you read about Sirk from the 70s onward is just everybody loves him.
Yes.
As they should. So I was glad to find something that was kind of critical, from a leftist perspective.
And complex, like it, as I mentioned to you in one of our chats, it's not a cheap takedown job. The author is actually trying to place the work within its context.
Yeah, but here's the thing: the same stuff that this guy is talking about in terms of the German sort of studio system.
Mm-hmm.
Sirk, Detlef Sirk, in Germany, when he came to Hollywood and became Douglas Sirk, he was dealing with a lot of the same sort of structures.
That's not surprising, though, is it? I mean, because I might be not remembering correctly, but I believe that one of Goebbels' objectives for Nazi cinema was to modernize it and to use techniques borrowed from Hollywood, because we know this in Goebbels' diaries, and as you know, I've been rereading Richard J. Evans' Third Reich trilogy, and he deals in the second book in the trilogy, which is the Third Reich in Power. He talks about what life was like in Germany during, as the Nazis were, as they said, coordinating. That was the term that the Nazis used for bringing the entire country under their complete control, was coordinating whatever you did with the Nazi objective. So, for example, if you had a singing club prior to their taking of power, it had to be coordinated, your singing club, with Nazi objectives. And so Goebbels wanted to do the same thing with the film industry, which was UFA, for example, a fantastic German studio, that Fritz Lang and various other people, luminaries of German cinema of the 1920s and into the pre-Nazi period. He loved their technical ability and their ability to tell stories. He just wanted them to do so in a way that he thought would be in line with so-called Aryan objectives. And I think that Sirk's melodrama would obviously fit in well because, and like Dennis, what was the name of that one movie about the kid who, it's Habanera, I believe, in which, the German woman, oh no, she's Swedish or what have you, but Nordic. She falls in love with a man in Puerto Rico, and she has a kid. And somehow the kid inexplicably comes out as blonde as as Thor, and then
I watched about half of that last night. Yeah.
And the kid has like dreams of snow and rustic things.
Sledding,
And the idea, like the racial memory of Nordicness, comes through, and that is like Nazi ideation through and through. And so, of course, Sirk's technique could be modified to that purpose.
Yeah. Well, speaking of sons, one of the most poignant tales of Sirk's life was he was married to I think she was an actor. Anyway, they were married for under 10 years. They had a child. And then they divorced. And then his ex-wife joined the Nazi Party. And got a court order in the 30s forbidding Sirk from seeing the child.
Wow.
And then she got the child into acting. So he was a child actor in Nazi propaganda films. The only way that Sirk could see his son was to go see these Nazi propaganda films.
How painful would that be?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He never saw him again. Wow. He made a movie, in fact, something, A Time to Live and A Time to Die, about trying to reconnect with his son. And, and then he left Germany. He married a Jewish woman. And so he was, persona non grata. He ended up leaving. A lot of his life is about having no place to be. I mean, when he was in California, like I said earlier, he said his happiest times were raising chickens and alfalfa in the San Fernando Valley. He was happier there than he was in Hollywood. And he talked about the German, emigre, Thomas Mann and Brecht and everyone. And it was like, he was like, they were so bitter, and all their whole thing was about hating America. And he's like, I never felt that. So anyway, how painful must that be, as you said? To only be able to see your son, on film, in a Nazi propaganda, movie. And
I can't even imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, but getting back to what I said earlier, that is one reason also that Sirk's life seems so perfect, It's like there was nothing wrong until I read this essay by the guy who's selling, and of course he's a human being.
Precisely. And you had to live, right? And also it's easy for us to forget, and this is what reading Evans' trilogy, especially the second book, bring about, life under Nazism, brings right into your mind, because it's vividly written. Terror, just complete terror, right? Of a type that is difficult for us to understand. And even for people, the United States is an open air prison in many ways. However, it's not coordinated in this fashion. And the Nazis were.
It's not. It's so vast
and chaotic, and also a bit chaotic, right? And there is a coordinating ideology, but it's not. Thus far, it's not as precisely targeted as what the Nazis did. Which is not to say that they were these machines, because there was an awful lot of chaos in Nazi Germany as well, and infighting and all sorts of terrible things. But
I watched one of those ridiculous cable TV things about Hitler's henchmen or something like that.
Yeah. Discovery Channel. It's like Hitler's gold, Hitler's submarine, Hitler's train. Like, oh my God.
Hitler's socks.
Hitler socks. Yes.
Yeah, it was actually very informative. But people try and pigeonhole it,
Yeah.
but it's more pigeonholable than
Yes.
what's going on in the United States, as I said.
Yes.
Because what's going on in the U.S. is just so, you got Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, So,
I was gonna say American ideology. The trouble with it is that it's hegemonic, but it's mostly scaffold.
Yes.
It's you have the skeleton for what American thought is supposed to be, but between the ignorance of Americans in general and the fact that we've always been, how did Gorbachev put it? He said we're a nation of shoplifters because we don't have civilization. We've never set up a civilization of agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
So the ideology is there in place of values. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
I would assume, I haven't studied Nazi Germany, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But in Germany, there's probably a set of uniting values of some sort. Whereas in America, it seems to me that we don't exactly have an agreed set upon values, which is kind of how it's been since the beginning. Because in the beginning, we were split between wanting to imitate the British, and imitate the French.
Yes, precisely.
And
it's denying the influence of the slaves who were helping to shape the society, but denying that was actually happening.
Oh, absolutely.
And still denying today,
and still denying to this day. And and of course, this isn't the Nazism podcast, but but I'll say this, and then we'll actually move
Hitler's podcast.
There's too many. There's way too many of those. But I'll say this, and then I think we should dive, and Dennis, I think we should dive into Written on the Wind, specifically, and how your ideas how what you're saying ties into that film. Yes, one of the things that I learned from Evan's book is that what the Nazis did, among other things, was take ideas that had pre-existed, right, in German culture. And of course, remember, Germany was not a united country, until the 19th century. And so there was no like German, there was like Prussia and Saxony, various places. But there were ideas that pertained in various areas that that the Nazis were able to take and then turn to their ends, and actually completing in their minds the work of creating a Germanic people, because there were these different ethnicities. That's really what we're talking about. These different ethnicities that happen to be in the same place or the same region. But yes, anyway, we don't want to fall. We've already fallen prey to Godwin's law about talking about the Nazis. How was your cornflakes?
You guys know, are you familiar with the guy named Mark Pauline?
The name, but not beyond that.
Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. He is an interesting guy. We can talk about maybe someday with regard to J.G. Ballard. If we should, yes. We got to get J.G. Ballard in here somewhere. Maybe Crash, maybe Cronenberg's Crash. Empire of the Sun.
Empire of the Sun is interesting. I think Crash is a better example because Empire is as a film, it's a great popcorn movie, which is bizarre for its subject matter, really.
And Ballard is in that movie.
Yes, yeah, he is.
Right.
So, anyway, but this guy Mark Pauline talked about American so-called neo-Nazis, and he's like, if these guys ever ran into real Nazis,
oh my God,
they would run for the hills.
They'd be pissing their pants. Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I don't. You may think you're Gestapo material, but I really don't think you are. I mean, you can beat me up, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah. The only material you are for the Gestapos is if you're an American neo-Nazi.
Yeah, precisely.
They're gonna play football.
Yeah, you're the guys who were eliminated in the Night of the Long Knives. But in any event, Written on the Wind though, I wanted to get us like back on that because one of the things I wanted to zero in on, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Dennis, and then you as well, Charles. I know you have a particular angle of attack, so to speak, regarding the film. One of the things that fascinates me about this film is Rock Hudson's character as an outsider to the world of the wealthy that he is in proximity to. He's close to the wealthy family. He is beloved of the patriarch of the family. And forgive me, I forget the name of the actor who actually plays the actual son.
Robert Stack.
Robert Stack, yeah. The
Untouchables.
Untouchables, that's right. Hudson's character is the son that the father wished he'd had, but he could not have that son because his son was born with the proverbial silver spoon, and it was given all the advantages, and therefore lacks what we would today call grit, right? The initiative, the drive, the discipline to actually run this oil empire. And so he wants his son, the patriarch, wants his son to be a certain way, which of course, he's a tough oil man, but he's not a barbarian. He's not a Philistine. He's a bit genteel for the portrayal of him is actually a bit genteel. And I get the impression that's because he's older and he's reaching the end of his life. And so he's not as razor tooth as he probably was when he was a young man. And plus he's worried about his children. So that also softens him as well. But Rock Hudson, in my notes about this, I called him the inside outsider because he certainly is more inside than some rando walking down the street. I mean, they wouldn't let him die on the street. They would take him to the hospital, take care of him, love him. But he's not a complete insider because he's not a member of the family, and he's not going to marry into the family because Dorothy Malone's character, who plays the daughter of the patriarch,
I would marry Dorothy Malone in a minute.
Well, I mean, yes. And there were moments when, she was interacting with Hudson. This one scene where they're in the lounge at the house and she's crawling all over him. And I'm like, there really is something wrong with you. Now, we know in real life, we know he's gay, but he's not supposed to be in the movie. And I'm like, dude, I really would not. I would not be making the choice you made at that particular moment. But
anyway. We're talking about a story here.
Yeah, we're talking about a story. And there's a reason for it, which actually within the context of the story, his treatment of her as a sister is quite logical. Mm-hmm. And it actually makes me like him as a character more because it means that he does actually love her, right? And he does care for her.
There's the scene in the bar.
Yeah, I mean, he loves her as a sister. Like, genuinely, he just loves her as a sister.
Yeah,
and it's quite deep. It's quite deep love, but which is why he doesn't want to become romantic. But yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on the position of the various characters in the story. Maybe starting with Hudson's character as this working class guy who is quite close to this family and who has an opportunity to actually become maybe CEO or something because the father wants to send him to Iran for an oil deal. Quite interesting geopolitical angle there from 1950s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was gonna say Iran. He says Iran.
Precisely. Yes, he says.
How many times do you hear that in the 50s?
Yes, precisely. And we know what was happening. We know that was the CIA's first operation was the overthrow of Mossadegh.
Yeah, Iran, Guatemala. Yeah.
Yes.
One thing I was going to say, or I was thinking, I was going to say that I grew up in oil country.
Mm.
I grew up in Oklahoma. And then I realized the whole United States is oil country.
Yes.
I mean, you're from Philadelphia, right? And
there's a massive refinery, in South Philadelphia.
I used to change my own oil, and I would use Pennzoil.
Yes.
you know. And
Yes.
Charles, there are refineries, I'm sure, in Missouri, you know, and but just in terms of my own uh, connection with this oil world, I had an uncle who was in the military, served in Korea, and
Hmm.
afterward he, I don't know how he got started, but he wound up like he wasn't an executive, I don't think, but he was like an office person
Hmm.
for oil. He lived in Kuwait. He lived in Iran.
Yeah.
I know this because my cousins, his daughters, would come home, or rather, they would come to, anyway, they would come for a month to stay with my grandparents every summer.
Hmm.
So I remember now, I can piece it together. Like I say, Kuwait, Iran, Scotland, they just sort of, they were following the oil, right?
Hmm. Yes.
So that was that. And then I had another side. I had an uncle who was what's called a tool pusher.
Mm.
You know that term?
I do not.
That's a person who supervises a rig, an oil rig.
Interesting. Interesting.
And and then there are roughnecks.
Hmm.
Those are the people that you pull the you pull the you're drilling, right,
Yes. Uh-huh.
and you get down deeper,
Yeah.
and then you had to pull it up,
Yeah.
and you add another piece to dig even deeper, right? Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Because the
So,
bit, maybe because the actual drill, it wears out as it interacts with the earth.
well,
I'm imagining.
it's the length.
Yeah. Okay. You have
You
to
have to add more length
more links. Yes,
to
to go
go
deeper.
further.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like chains, and it's like heavy metal, literally heavy
Hmm.
metal.
Hmm.
So my father, uh, to earn extra money, worked as a roughneck. So
Mm.
I remember as a kid going to these uh, rigs, and I don't know if you've ever heard about Oklahoma and red dirt. There's something about the amount of iron in the soil that there's like red dirt.
I've
Anyway,
seen that actually in Croatia. They have the same thing.
yeah. So anyway, I remember my uncle. His car was always covered with this red dirt, and he had
Hmm.
boots, and So anyway,
Hmm.
I'm very familiar with this Rock Hudson character,
Hmm.
and the Robert Stack character, on the other hand, was just a playboy
Yeah.
and not even a really good.
He wasn't a good one. Yes. Yeah. It's like
you know,
he's fascinating because he's a failure as a playboy. It's like and that's fascinating. He's like a failure all the way around. Like he's not he doesn't have the technical knowledge of the business. He doesn't have business. He's not a finance person. He's not good at protecting his sister or being a good brother. Because I
Yeah,
mean, I,
that scene in the bar, like we talked about
yeah,
earlier. He tries to protect Dorothy May,
yes.
but Rock Hudson ends up doing it himself because
He can't, because
it's
Robert Stack's character can't do it, and it's
he can't
fascinating
do
to
it.
me because he loves Rock Hudson. I mean, this is it's his best friend. It's like, and he is like a brother to him, but he's also immensely jealous. And Charlie, I know that you would have something. I'm sure Sarge would have something to say about this because there's this the bind between them where I hate the fact that you are the person I'm supposed to be, but you're from the wrong side of the tracks. And uh, how can it be? How can it be that we assume he went to the best schools and did all these things? He doesn't understand that the material conditions of his life ill prepare him for the person that he thinks he should be and that his father thinks that he should be. And that absolutely fascinates me because I know that there's millions of people out there who cannot figure out why they aren't the person that they think they should be and never put two and two together. They never think, oh, well, it's because you can't give a person $100 million when they're 12 and expect them to grow up to be the kind of person who goes, oh, how do I figure this situation out? Because they never had to figure a situation out.
Yeah, and as time goes on, it's like, it'll be $1 billion soon.
Right, exactly. And you don't have to worry about it. And so, I mean, this is why Musk is such an absolute idiot, right? Because he never really had to figure anything out. So that dynamic, the family dynamic of, and also we've totally forgotten about Lauren Bacall, because I'm trying to figure out where she fits in this. I think that she's supposed to be the quote unquote good girl, but she's not an idiot. She's very smart. And I like her character because she's always thinking and she's always aware of everything that's going on. And so it's natural that she and Rock Hudson have, an attraction to each other, not only at the level of, being attractive people, but at the level of, well, we know more about the world than than our wealthy opposites, so to speak.
Well, Charles, you want to jump in? I don't want to.
Oh, you're on mute, amigo.
There we go. All right. So I actually had a question for you. So while I was watching Written on the Wind, I was doing a little research, and I saw the novel that the movie takes inspiration from.
Oh, yeah.
And I also read, and I wanted to ask you about the history because I had read basically that some young rich guy named Zachary Smith Reynolds really likes an actress.
The Reynolds tobacco fortune.
Yeah,
really?
And I was going to ask you a little bit about that history because I know a little bit of it. I know that he and Libby Holman, who was an actress. Fell in love.
That's it.
So they just fell in love, or well, he fell in love with her, I should say, and then they had a house party where he ended up shot.
She was less than interested.
Yeah,
I love that phrase.
Yeah. I was going to say, and then it ruined her, or people say that it ruined her life, which I think she ended up committing suicide.
Oh my!
Can I read something here?
Yeah, please do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please do.
Wikipedia. The film's source novel by Robert Wilder was inspired by the life and death of Zachary Smith Reynolds, son of R.J. Reynolds and heir to the Reynolds tobacco fortune, who died from a gunshot wound to the head at his family's estate after a birthday party. His wife, torch singer Libby Holman, and close friend Albert Walker fell under suspicion due to conflicting accounts given about the night's events, though neither were ever formally charged with a crime. I could go on, but that's basically it.
Yeah, so I had read that, and I didn't know if there was more to it or anything like that, but I just found that kind of.
I think it was better to move it to oil and Texas than South Carolina and tobacco. You know what I mean?
Right. And I was going to say to Dwayne real quick, you were talking about Elon Musk. I was going to say, pressure makes diamonds, but it does nothing to hold diamonds.
Yes, that's a beautiful phrase. I love that, and I love how Sirk, in his direction, shows this visually in the music. And of course, for those who haven't seen the film, and of course, one of the reasons why we do this is to encourage you to do so. It's a beautifully shot film. It's just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous to look at.
Looking at interviews with Sirk, one thing that he says over and over, the camera was always my friend. I could always depend on the camera.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about Sirk, we're not just talking about stories. We're talking about mirrors and color. If you look at Written on the Wind, the primary colors, red, yellow, blue.
That's right.
It's just, and this is why I said earlier, I was glad I found that essay by this guy who said something bad about Sirk. Because everybody loves everything about Sirk, and why not?
because you're overwhelmed. I mean, when I rewatched the film in preparation for this, and I did it on a bigger screen, just shot for shot for shot. I mean, it's so beautifully done that it just sort of just washes over you. And like even the quiet moments. I mean, there was a moment where Rock Hudson drives off into the distance in the sports car, and then you have like the broad vista ahead of him, and it's so large. And of course, I believe this was done in CinemaScope. So in a theater, it must have been really quite something. But then the moments where Dorothy Malone's character is looking at Rock Hudson longingly from the window of her bedroom as he's talking to Lauren Bacall's character in, I guess, the driveway of the mansion of the family's mansion. And, she's in half shadow. And the half shadow technically makes no sense. Like there's no reason for her, considering where she's standing in the window.
There's no story reason, but there's a cinematic reason.
But there's a cinematic reason for it, and it's and of course, it's telling you something. It's telling you that that she's. You can feel the emotion of that moment. That she's barely constrained. Like the longing, the rage, the sadness. It's all there. Like in this moment, that this poor, lonely woman who maybe she's, you think, well, just, you're smart, go off and do your own thing. Like everybody, Robert Stack's character, stop trying to be something that you're not going to be, find what you need to be. And he can't do it. And so they're also trapped, which is another thing about this. There's cages, and Sirk does such a beautiful job of showing you these cages that people are in. That's also what came through to me about the movie very vividly.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Charles.
I was going to say one of the impressions I had. First off, the only bad thing about watching a Sirk film is, for me, it reveals the absolute emptiness of film criticism nowadays, if you can call it criticism. Because film criticism, the great thing about Douglas Sirk is there's so many different things. There's the use of the camera. There's the colorful, or the colors in the background, the use of shadow, dialogue, the actors themselves. There's the storyline. And if you were to review a Douglas Sirk film, I feel like you would have to at least touch on all of them in some way, or at least show how it all works. Yeah. Which is what film criticism should be. It should be taking a film and not getting stuck on politics only, or only on the director. What a lot of people do is where they pick one thing and they get some focus. And they shouldn't. Film should be an experience of different things. You're experiencing the technical skill of the cameraman. You're experiencing the narrative imagination of the author, auteur. You're experiencing the skills of the actors themselves who are playing somebody else. And you're experiencing the development of aesthetics. And as I pointed out before, all films are kind of a mix of vanity and self-interest. And if there's a little talent in it, it gets turned into art, which is what Douglas Sirk does. And it's a very good movie.
Yeah, he was very actors loved him.
Can imagine.
Right. And I think a lot of that has to do with his experience, which he has in common with Fassbinder, which was theater.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Theater is a very fertile soil. If anybody, and I know actors used to always come from now. It depends. They usually come from Disney Channel. Nowadays,
from
Disney Channel or now it's starting to be
Coppertone commercials.
Yeah. It started to be from commercials. It started to be from TikTok or Disney Channel.
Yeah,
does us a great disservice.
Yes, you make an excellent point.
Right,
yeah.
But the interesting thing about Douglas Sirk, and I wanted to relate this experience to you guys before I go into what I want to say, but it felt like Written on the Wind was almost, it's like a horror movie without the jump scares, without the blood and gore. It's people would probably call it a psychological thriller, but the way it was set up in an aesthetic, the use of the shadows, the dialogue itself. If you change the music in the background to fit the kind of music we use in horror movies and stuff, I feel like you could comparably sort of set Written on the Wind as a horror movie. Not that it was meant to.
That's quite interesting. I think Brian, if Brian De Palma was putting it together, that's probably how he would have positioned it.
Right,
or John Carpenter.
Right,
yes.
And for me, that's what's brilliant about Douglas Sirk. In the movies that I've seen, and I've only seen 3 of them, I greatly like his work on a very intuitive aesthetic because it's a pleasure.
You know what's funny, Charles? A month or 2 ago, you said that Douglas Sirk is one of your favorite directors.
He is, absolutely.
And now you're saying you've only seen 3 of his movies.
I'm sorry. I'm on the hot seat now. Oh no. I'm going to be canceled. I'm going to be canceled for lying.
I think that's.
Well, I see it as I see it as.
Oh, I'm still here. My camera just went.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have I'll say though that when I say I've only watched 3 movies, it's only because of time. It's not because of inclination and I think that if you're a good director, to me, and maybe this is just the American in me. Yeah, this might be the American in me fast tracking things. But I feel like if you've seen 3 movies from a director and you're still not sure, probably not. But with Douglas,
I absolutely agree.
And
one really,
right, and that's what I was going to say for Douglas Sirk. The first movie I ever saw was, and that's all I needed to know that this was a Now to the literary parallels for me. There's 2 literary parallels that I thought of immediately, particularly with Written. Although, actually, my first parallel is going to be for Sirk. But have you guys ever read the author John O'Hara?
I have, but nothing's actually jumping out at me.
Yeah, well, his I think it's called Butterfield 8.
Oh yeah,
I've
seen the movie.
That's what I was about to say. A lot of his books became movies, and it's because his style of writing, and the best comparison I can think of is a recent comparison. But his writing style is a lot like the way they shot it. It's very visceral. It's very, there's product placement in there. Gore Vidal joked that John O'Hara was more concerned about making sure there were name brands in his books than he was with his characters having good names.
Is there anything in the world that Gore Vidal didn't have something to say about?
Oh, I know. He's Gore Vidal is an American Henry Wilton. He's talking. He has an opinion on most things, but John O'Hara's books, and I'll admit I've only read Butterfield. It's just, again, like with Douglas Sirk, I just haven't exactly had time. There's so much to read and watch. There's only so much time in a day, but his style makes me think of Douglas Sirk in the sense that John O'Hara doesn't dramatize the artificial aspects of our lives, and I don't think Douglas Sirk does either. In fact, Douglas Sirk, in my opinion, is a genius at using the artificial way in which we as a part of the aesthetic of how his characters, deal with it.
Say that again.
The artificial nature of the way we live.
Would you clarify that with the artificial way that Americans live?
Yeah, probably. I would say it's probably more an American phenomenon. John O'Hara was an American writer. He usually only wrote about so it would probably be fair to say American, but it's kind of artificial may not be the exact.
Mm-hmm.
And because the reason I say artificial is only because of the fact that a lot of times with authors and some directors, I find that, if they were to zoom in, say on a Coca-Cola can,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't be it would be an attempt to make it fit with the background. I would say I'm speaking in layman terms, so I probably sound.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be a way of trying to naturalize the consumerist aspects of it.
So, in other words, to make the film seem realistic or relatable,
right,
by having
right.
everyday objects in the film.
Yeah, it's basically I would call it a fake form of realism, where it's trying to make everything seem realistic, and I feel like Sirk to me doesn't do that. He kind of and when I say artificial, that's not to mean to say that it's unreal.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that, here's the best way to put it. If you walk into anybody's house or anybody's room, it is set up in a particular way. Sartre actually writes about this in his writings about psychoanalysis and being and a few other essays. But if you walk into somebody's room, that room is set up the way that person lives their lives. Mm-hmm. You can tell, it's kind of like Sherlock Holmes, where you can pick up what people's lives are from the way they set things up.
Mm-hmm.
If they, if you walk into a room and everything is mostly on the right-hand side, it's probably because the right hand kind of shifted direction. And so we live our lives where we take everything, whether it's brand name sodas or our favorite sweatpants or whatever, and our lives are set up because we organize our world in a particular way. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Douglas Sirk captures that. Because when you go into a room where these characters are, it's artificial in the sense that you can tell that a human being has been in there, sitting in the chair. They put their, they have the bed made, unmade, whatever, kind of like you can tell that it's designed.
Yes. And
he doesn't see, he seems to let that play out with the rest of the aesthetics. It's very human, and hopefully I haven't butchered that explanation much. But
no, I think that comes through. That comes through to me, because what you're saying is that it's an I mean, obviously it's a film, so everything is self-conscious, everything is planned.
Right.
But the way that it plays on camera is a kind of realism through hyperrealism, perhaps. Right. And that also, the thing about the brilliance of melodrama at its best is that even if people are playing things very large, the emotions are still emotions that actual people have. Right. Like people do find themselves in situations in which they're embarrassed, or they have, unfulfilled longings or anger, or they feel that they're not the person they should be. Like these
Absolutely.
are all real. They're real emotions.
And I was going to say, I feel like in a Sirk in Sirk films, let's focus on Written on the Wind. I feel like the emotions are always, they are, at least they're acted out in a very real manner.
Yeah,
it makes the environment for a second or for a little bit seem staged, and staged not in a way like it's lying to us, but it's like I'll do it this way. The playboy who doesn't know how to be a playboy.
Yeah.
Whenever he has his emotions, the absolute pathetic sort of nature of the character is exaggerated. Or it's made more specific or more it's easier to realize for the audience, because you see that he has set up his life where he's playing at something that he doesn't know how to do.
That he doesn't know how to do, yeah.
Or that he's not naturally good at. And when he has his troubles, when he has his issues, it's more magnified.
Like when, to give an example, there's a moment in the film where he arranges for himself and Lauren Bacall to go away on a little getaway. And it's supposed to be, his opportunity to seduce her. But he's so charmless, and clumsy and obvious. And she's quite smart, that she knows what's going on. And she leaves this hotel, this resort that he flew them to. And then he's apologetic. And actually, you get the sense that he is full of genuine regret, because that's not actually who he is.
Right.
But he's play acting at being the seducer.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, Douglas Sirk describes Robert Stack as a hick.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And
he, and he,
right.
Yes, you're right.
It's like 40,000 people. This town named after his father.
Right. Right. He's not a sophisticate at all. Right. He's not Gatsby. He's a guy who has a suit that Gatsby might wear, but it doesn't fit him, because
he's Elvis Presley. He flies to New York for a peanut butter toast.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
You don't go to the Russian tea room. You get peanut butter jelly sandwich.
Yeah. You don't go to one of those real nice restaurants and go, do you have any chicken tenders?
Yeah, you go to 21.
Some French fries.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because you are what you are. I mean, at least in terms of these characters, and they don't even know. They don't know themselves well enough to know if the person they're portraying is who they actually want to be.
Right, and
there's the lunch at 21.
Yes,
and I know 21 from Rear Window, and Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly goes to 21.
And she and that's a marvelous example. You're making a marvelous comparison, because Grace Kelly's character in Rear Window is a true New York sophisticate. Like you believe her, and
she's on the cover.
Yes, and there's nothing. And what's beautiful is that there's nothing pretentious about it, because that's who she is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was going to say to kind of wrap up what I'm saying, actually, to kind of bring it towards Sartre again. I guess I'm just the Sartre guy. But
you have to accept it.
He does seem to come up.
Well, interestingly enough, he was criticized once, and I can't remember who it was. I actually tried to figure it out before we started. I can't find out who it was. But it stuck with me. He was criticized in his work because people said that it seemed like he had written his philosophy for novels and movies, because basically the criticism of existentialism is that, so you have a character that has to make choices against the situation. And that's kind of how novels and movies are set up. It might be a series of situations, but ultimately, it's a character in a situation enacting choices. And so he was criticized for that, but that's kind of why Sartre plays so well with analysis of movies. And in this case, Written on the Wind is a fabulous depiction of Sartre's idea that we often live our lives playing as something. For example, Sartre believes, unlike I'd say contradiction to, say, Sigmund Freud or others who have theories of the ego, Sartre thinks that the ego is an illusion. It's or not an illusion. He says it's imaginary. And the reason he says it's imaginary is basically whenever we reflect on ourselves, we never get a full picture. We might see ourselves in a mirror, or we might see, if somebody wrote something about us or something. We might get a perspective or two, but we usually don't really know or understand who we are. And so what happens is, out of the life we live, we pull together a view of, or an image of who we are. And very often, what Sartre points out is that society dictates what it is. When he talks about the waiter, who's acting like a waiter, doing exactly as he's been told. That waiter is obviously under the thumb of a manager who's telling him to do this, that, or the other. But ultimately, in this movie, you have the rich kid who's playing the playboy.
Mm-hmm.
You have the outsider playing the insider. Even though technically both are true, you have the woman who's intelligent, kind of playing to a fool, more or less, even though she knows that it's kind of the best way to describe this.
Do you mean Dorothy Malone's character or Lauren Bacall's character?
Lauren Bacall's. I am terrible with names, but when like you were talking about when he takes her to the hotel to try to seduce her, it's almost like being it's almost trying to figure out exactly what part she's trying to play. I feel like
her character is a little bit of a mystery to me, I must admit. Hey there, Dwayne Monroe back again. Well, that was a rather abrupt ending, and the reason is because we had some technical difficulties as we rounded out the hour for our recording. We lost Dennis's audio and a few other things happened. So I'm putting this capper on things. We may return to this topic again. In fact, I'm fairly certain that we will. So even with the difficulties that we had, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to give us a like on your favorite podcatcher. And until next time, this is Dwayne Monroe for my co-host Dennis Claxton and R.C. Charles Roberts, saying au revoir from Film Conversations.